welcome to another episode of Too Many Points on the Tell Me More podcast. I'm your host, Mac Moore, here again with Big Colin Wright. How's it going?
Good. How's your week going, man?
Not too bad. It's surprisingly full of sports, not just from the national sports that we're going to end up talking about, the stuff that's going, but in terms of the high school sports I've covered, more action than I expected. Actually, one of them was a crossover. It was the high school, and then it was the National Women's Soccer League. One of the players, I don't know if you watched that finals game, but the Houston Dash forward, Shea Groom, she scored that final goal like 34 seconds into stoppage time to finish off and get that Challenge Cup title. She went to Liberty High School in Liberty, Missouri. So that was a big thing. I had to I had a whole plan for this week, what I was going to do on Monday, and I ended up having to shift gears right about that big moment for her and get that going. And then I got to design a pretty cool centerpiece for our newspaper this week. I just finished that up a few hours ago. So I was excited for that. It was good. It was that first real moment of just watching something amazing happen, that first championship win for any team in the U.S. Since, coronavirus shut everything down. So I think when you first get those games going, that's kind of a big deal. But I think even more is when the games start to really matter. And, that's kind of what's hard for me with, MLB, because for me, it's just hard to imagine even a 60-game season. It's like, this is so short. There's not, it's going to matter more. And it's like, it's still 60 games. That's still a lot for me to think any individual game matters. NBA is going, but I'm not going to. I like NBA, but other than just throwing it on for a second, I did not watch the scrimmages. I'm waiting for real action. Now, in my mind, those 8-game play-in, because of what it's worth and because it is just 8 games packed into a quick week, that will matter to me. I'm excited for that part. But otherwise, there was just kind of this, okay, sports are back, but are they really? And that Challenge Cup championship in the NWSL, that was that first real moment of, oh my God, we're back. There are things that are going to get me juiced for sports. And on that note, to start out with, what's the first thing? Has there been anything that's kind of got you jolted, got you going? And obviously this is supposed to be a betting podcast, although we haven't got around to that because there haven't been a lot of good bets to go with yet. Have you had a bet yet with sports on the return?
So on Monday, I was planning on finally, placing my first bet since sports have been back for the first time in 4.5 months. I saw that the New York Mets on Sunday night got slapped around, just got killed. And I was like, they're going to Boston on Monday. And I was like, I'm going to put some money on the Red Sox. And then decided not to. And I'm glad I didn't because the Red Sox lost to the Mets. So I have not placed a bet yet. But the good news is that means I'm not down. With Major League Baseball, even though it's a shorter regular season, I don't plan on moving a lot of money there. With NBA, I'll probably do a lot once the playoffs start, but I have a little action going tomorrow night. But yeah, it's tough with baseball because I go back and forth. I look at pitching matchups. I still consider home field advantage, not because of the crowd or the field so much, but just that whatever team gets to bat last has a slight advantage. Yeah. So I've looked at that a little bit, but exciting. I watched some Royals and Indians over the weekend. They were able to steal one. They scored 14 runs on Monday. The offense came alive. And then, of course, you had Sporting Kansas City win a shootout to advance to the quarterfinals of the MLS is back. So it just is nice to have live sports. It's not perfect. It's not going to be, but it's sports on TV that we haven't had in a long time. So that's been really nice.
All right. Yeah. It's always good. And I think it's weird because I think the best way to compare it, and there's been some other reasons that it's been compared to this, but it's like concussions in the NFL. It's like there's something that when you know about it kind of changes how you perceive the game. You can't enjoy jacked up anymore. That's gone, but that hasn't stopped us from really enjoying sports. And I think in the same way, we're definitely worried about the safety of the players. We're worried about what this means because of the potential spread at a time where we still want to get those numbers under control. So we are worried about those kind of big picture implications, but there you still will have moments. We're going to get lost into sports when they're on, even if those things are happening. And, if at the end of the day, they need to be, the plug needs to be pulled, I would hope that the mechanisms are in place to just stop that before it gets out of hand. And it's just hard to tell. It's like we don't want to just overreact, because if you're gonna look at something like even this Marlins outbreak, or you look at the initial test for these leagues when they're just trying to get to a baseline to figure out who has coronavirus, how do we get them on quarantine and get it so that we're at zero and have a chance to have these sports played. But you're aiming for that, and if any one test sets you off, then this should have just never happened. But if you're going to gauge it and kind of figure out where you're at, then it's tough. It's tough to figure out, when is this going to be a problem? When will you need to pull the plug? And it's something like Marlins getting half their team to test positive when just less than a week ago they were at zero. It's tough to imagine that that's a good sign for sports to be able to be played at the professional level. We are right now having colleges in the midst of discussing how they're going to make that happen. Can they make that happen? And then obviously, as I mentioned earlier, I'm on the high school beat right now in North KC. This is something that easily could mean that those sports can't happen. And I think they all have different challenges to meet if it's going to happen. But maybe it's wrong. Maybe it's not good for me to be a person that can try to separate that. And it's like, if this is a net negative and shouldn't happen, I shouldn't get enjoyment out of watching when people force it to happen. But I don't think we're at that point yet. I think based on a lot of the numbers and kind of, looking at what's going on, particularly with how well the NBA has been able to pull it off, I think we have good signs that if the cases are down in a particular area, and obviously the NBA is something different when they're having a full-on bubble, but that is reflective of, we don't have the virus in here right now, and we're not having people interact who have the virus. That can help keep you at zero. That risk means we get the numbers down. Sports are possible. We're not just waiting for a vaccine. And if that's the case, then it's hard for me to tell anybody that you're crazy for trying to put it on, which is about where I was a month ago. That's how I felt. Now, somehow I feel more optimistic despite watching an MLB team have half their roster come down with COVID.
Yeah, I think that the Marlins thing was, I guess it wasn't necessarily a surprise that you had so many players as positive. And maybe this is me being naive, I was surprised it happened 3 games into the season. I was thinking like, okay, here we go. Like, we have 60 games. Like, obviously teams aren't going to travel quite as much as usual. Like, there won't be the West Coast to East Coast flights. There'll be some 6-game home stands and then some 7-game road stands. But we had just finished the first weekend where every team was 2-1 or 1-2. And then the Marlins had 9 and then 13 and 17, and just an overwhelming number of players and coaches test positive. And so Major League Baseball was proactive. They postponed the games, and then they decided for the whole week, no Marlins games. But you have to imagine that this isn't even the first time it happens. So, Mike, the tricky part is, like, when this happens in a week from now or 2 weeks or 3 weeks from now, like, are you just going to have one team play 54 games or one team only plays 52 games? Logistically, the way that it's set up, they don't have any space between the end of the regular season and the playoffs. So I don't know, like, how they're going to make things work. And obviously, I don't think it's a surprise. The Miami Marlins probably are not a playoff team. However, 16 of the 30 teams are going to the playoffs. So it's not really fair to just say, oh, well, the Marlins can just be one of the 14 teams that doesn't really matter at the end of the season. So, yeah, I think in other sports that it's going to kind of be the same story. The good news out of Orlando has been the NBA really seems to be getting a good grasp on how to do it successfully. Obviously, the first game still hasn't happened yet, and we have 2.5 more months that we need to get through with the bubble in Orlando. But I knew when Major League Baseball decided to play all their games at home stadiums all across the U.S., it was going to be tricky. And I have doubts on, not that the season's going to be completed, because I think they're going to find a way to make it a successful regular season and playoffs, but how many teams are going to play 60 games versus how many are going to play 52, 55, 57? I don't know, but that's a challenge they're going to have to figure out pretty quickly.
Yeah, and my guess for the games is you are just going to have to live with that. If it becomes a big issue and people don't want to just go by whatever the winning percentage is, which in fairness, you talk about the Marlins like this hurting their playoff chances, like it could help. If like you're a team that doesn't quite have it. And we talked about this. More teams are in contention, not just because of an expanded playoffs, but because the sample size of 60 games is easier than 160 games. Well, 50 games is also an easier sample size. A couple weeks of just playing good baseball, which bad teams are capable of doing. Then all of a sudden, you can sneak your way in and you have a better shot because you lost out on 10 games. Now, there are the issues of you have 30 players who are trying to recover from COVID. That could hurt those potential runs that you could have, but it lowers that sample size, gives you a bigger shot, so that's always possible. I think with the NBA and what they've shown, it's interesting that it is kind of right there next to the Marlins. Like you're in the same area, and we know that those high rates, and I think a couple weeks ago, one of my guests, Marco Marquez, came on to talk about just so upset that they picked Disney World and that they were going through with it when you saw those numbers. But as you see, it's like if you're able to create that bubble, that matters more necessarily than where it is, But for MLB, when you don't have that bubble and you have all those positive tests around you, you're in trouble. And that's probably bigger than anything else. It's not just that it's like, how risky is baseball? The other teams have 0 cases right now, which, in fairness, Marlins had 0 a week ago. There could be another team that has a similar outbreak, and they don't necessarily have to be in an area like the Marlins are, where the numbers are up, and it doesn't seem like the politicians in that area are doing a lot to fix the problems, right? But it still seems like the test, the number of positives in an area is definitely going to be such a huge factor. And as those go down, if you can get them to go down, then I think having what you believe to be healthy players, particularly when they are able to be tested, I think that's a good sign for sports to happen, for those sports that can do that. Then as you start moving down the list where, the NBA is able to do it every day, having tests. MLB had their problems where it's supposed to be every day, but you're talking about people who are going days, nearly a week without getting tested. That was a problem. When you get to the college level, are there going to be that many teams that are able to get that many tests done that consistently, not just for money, but when you're talking about using up tests when they're needed somewhere else, particularly as the pandemic numbers are still really high. I think the earlier in this process is going to be the hardest thing. It's getting that season off the ground to start with is going to be the hardest part. But there's a good shot that once you kind of get through that early going, you get the numbers down in most places across the country, sports become much more viable. And, as a person covering high school sports, the conversation is about, can school happen? And it almost seems like, for the most part, other than the ability to push students further apart in classrooms and keep the social distancing aspect up, wear a mask because you're not doing the physical exercise, the numbers game of schools is worse than even football, which is probably the sport that has the biggest uphill climb. But other sports, they're probably more feasible than in-person instruction, So that's something where, like I said, it's hard to be optimistic, but I'm starting to become more optimistic as we're seeing these sports go, as even where people are freaking out from the Marlins outbreak. I think all the other things we've seen right now and the different studies that we're starting to see as we're getting more information on this virus, I think it's becoming much more feasible to imagine that happening. It's just harder to imagine most sports starting now when the numbers are as high as they are. But once you get those numbers down, it doesn't look like sports are likely to be the instigator of causing those numbers to skyrocket. It wasn't sports being played over the summer that caused the numbers to shoot back up once we all started leaving our homes, in June. It's crazy, but as most people look at the Florida Marlins thing and they are on like their lowest, just they can't even, people who were positive are no longer positive. I was very negative for a while, and now I'm putting all the pieces together. I'm like, I think it could work. I need to see a couple more data points, but like it's finally gotten to a point where I feel like I can be extremely hopeful for sports without feeling like I'm rooting for something that's going to cause calamity.
Yeah, I think that the difficult part is we've had what we can call the 4 major professional sports in America. We've had them back for a week, and we've already had a team with like what we would consider a major outbreak. And so I guess I'm just trying to figure out, as we get into August and September and October, and we have potentially college sports in the fall, and we have potentially high school sports in the fall, and we have NBA, NHL, MLB, and then not that far after NFL. How many days or weeks can we go successfully without another outbreak? And the thing is, like, obviously there's going to be more cases. Like, we know that. Like, obviously the commissioners of these professional sports leagues, they are aware there's going to be more positive cases. And it sucks, but that's the world we're living in. I think it's just going to be how do we respond to that? And I don't know if there's any like great answers, but the most important thing is like not being afraid to shut it down. Like, obviously, if there's a handful of positive cases in the bubble in Orlando for the NBA playoffs, they're not just going to send everyone home and say that's it. They're going to find a way to make it work. But on a smaller level, let's say at the high school level, I think it'll be interesting to see, like, as we have some high school football across the country this fall, when are we going to say, okay, let's stop? Like, okay, like, and even like college football, the billion-dollar industry that it is at the NCAA level, you're going to have each conference try to do things different, each university try to do things a little different. And like you alluded to a few minutes ago, are they going to be tested every week, every day, twice a month, twice a week? And if they are, that's 120, 150 tests they're taking away from someone else that might need it. So there's a lot of logistical things that need to be figured out. I'm personally shocked that college football hasn't tried to move to the spring. I don't think there's a chance in the world they're going to be successful this fall. I still don't really think there is, but I could be proven wrong. I just think that's a lot of hurdles to jump through on such a large roster at each university. So
yeah, and I think part of it is the different leagues, the different teams. They're starting to kind of get to this consensus that it's not really going to be about anything they can do, and I think to a certain degree, we were kind of aware of this. There's not like a solution that any of the NCAA directors can do, any of the conference commissioners. Like, there are moves you need to do to make it possible and to be ready for a season to happen. But honestly, it is just society at this point. It's like, if the numbers can be brought down because we act in a way that can, make that happen sooner rather than later, then it's possible. And there is still that shot that, just having that many people on a field, if the numbers are more than 0 for COVID, you're going to get one positive that's going to lead into a bunch more positives. You're going to have that outbreak. But if throughout the country it is not at the levels that it's at, if it's at the levels we've seen other countries get the coronavirus positive test rates down to, then it becomes easier to pull off. It becomes something that the college football teams that know they kind of have the infrastructure in place, that you're seeing a lot more at kind of the Division II levels, junior college levels, just everything that's not Division I football deciding to move to the spring, because they can make it happen and it's easier to pull off with whatever sort of, they don't have these major TV deals that would need so much back and forth to get them to move. And this is something you can't just make that decision and say, well, we're going to move it out to the spring. It's like a wait and see. Every week it changes. And if over the next month we finally get, we had the president finally say, wear a mask. We've had a lot more kind of movement on that front. If that helps over the next month drive down those numbers, then all of a sudden you're looking maybe not the beginning of September because you need practice time, but instead of practicing in August to be ready for September to be the start of the season, you're practicing in September for October to be the start of the season. And if you're that's why the conversation about getting rid of the non-conference games has been such a big deal, because that might just be all they're left with is we need to only play conference games because that's the timeline that lines up with when the numbers are low enough for this to be possible. And if that can happen, then it kind of makes sense for college football to say, yeah, we need to do it now, because there are just so many hoops that they'll have to jump through if they try to push it to the spring. Similarly, talking about the high school level, the football, if you move that out to the spring, all of a sudden you have kids that are multi-sport athletes that are picking between, am I going to play football or am I going to run track this year? And you're going to cause those issues where otherwise you keep it into the fall and you can gauge, okay, we can't start now, but when the numbers do make it possible, we can start then and have that season, and we're not trying to trample over another season. And you're talking about those track kids, the ones who had competed this last year and lost their spring season. You're them are now going to have to miss 1 year, then not get to play in the fall, then in the spring have to make that tough decision of football or track. That's really hard on those kids. Particularly, you got kids that are going into their senior year this year. They've had to deal with the junior year being destroyed. They watch their classmates that were seniors have to deal with how hard that was. They know how hard it's going to be, and they're going to have a whole year of it, a whole year of uncertainty going in, and that's just it's too tall of an order. So I understand the hesitancy to make that move. It does seem more plausible for college, but at some point, it's just too big. College football, Division I college football is just way too big to make those moves, and it's almost easier to just lose a season. Rather than try to move it to the spring, and now you're competing with college basketball. Now you're going to end up causing all of that, part of the draw of college football is the connection to the NFL. You now are going to have players that are trying to play their season when they should be getting ready for the draft. Or in a lot of cases, you're probably going to have players that are just getting ready for the draft. They won't play the college season if you move it out to the spring. There's just so many things that you can't be sure of, and it would be really tough for them to handle if they just canceled everything, said we're going to the spring, and then all of a sudden a month from now the numbers are low enough that it's like, oh, you guys probably could have done this, you guys. So I can see why they just keep holding on and hoping they can just buy more time. It's just they're also kind of running out, and I guess at least at the college level, they have run through a lot of the solutions. Seems like at the NFL level, they've done a very poor job of planning for this. They had more time than the other professional leagues, and they didn't come in with any sort of protocol. The NBA mastered it. They gave you an idea. The NBA or the MLB gives you kind of a look into why it might be harder when you have bigger rosters, and, just how do you pull this off when you're not in a bubble? But they didn't learn anything from them. They're running in and they're trying to argue with the players over how this is going to be done. Now you're having players that are starting to opt out and decide that it's either not worth it, or you have David Renee Tardif of the Chiefs deciding that he'd as a doctor, he'd rather put his time into the medical field. If he's going to put his life on the line, then he's going to do it for something that he knows is going to be helpful to society as much as he loves football. He's chosen to go the other way, and you got to respect that. But you're also looking at these football players, and it could be a mass exodus. I mean, you're talking about they're already putting their lives on the line by playing the game if there isn't a pandemic. Then you add in all of those extra risk factors. It's hard to imagine this going well for the NFL, and a lot of it is you didn't plan. Like they could be in better footing, and obviously there's no guarantee any season's going to work at any level, but you have to put in the time. You have to come up with a great plan so that if the chips fall in your favor, you're ready to go, and the NFL just isn't.
Yeah, Roger Goodell really outdid himself this time. Has 5 months to get ready for the upcoming season. Literally, the pandemic could not have hit at a more, I don't want to say perfect time, but a more ideal time for the NFL, because the Super Bowl had just happened. And then a month later, most of the country, and especially the U.S., just stopped what they're doing as they're facing something we haven't seen in 100 years. And Goodell is able to do the draft virtually from his basement. And then he spends all of April, May, June, and July doing whatever Roger Goodell does, and there's no plan. So I'm excited to see what happens with the upcoming NFL season. But I think that the trend you're going to see over the next few weeks is NFL players opting out, saying, I'm not playing this year. We've already started to see it. I think that's going to be it won't just be a few – it'll be dozens of players, I feel like, that are going to not play this year. And obviously with no preseason, I don't think that's going to have a big impact. I think they can prepare in training camp and get ready for, the September 13th or whatever it is, week one. But I think that there's going to be rosters that are going to be shaken up. And I think, of course, once you have 1 or 2 or 3 teams with 5 or 10 or 25 cases that are positive, then what do you do? So I just think that they did a really, really weak job the last few months putting a plan together, but we'll see. Maybe they'll get lucky.
All right, we're going to go into like mini fan focus mode. So Chiefs right now, you have David Tardif going off. He's leaving for the reason of humanitarian efforts. Then you have Damian Williams that we just got the news of today, stepping away because there's a certain running back from LSU who's already going to take his job. When you have those losses, which one do you think will be the bigger impact for the Chiefs if indeed an NFL season happens?
Yeah, the one that surprised me the most, I guess, was Damian Williams, just because he was so productive last year and was great in the playoffs. But because the Chiefs spent their first-round pick on Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I think he's NFL ready. Based on what I've seen and heard, I think he's going to step in and really have a great rookie season. So I think Duvernay Tardif is actually going to be a big loss. He not only has he been a starter for most of his career with Kansas City, but he's been really good at what he does. So I think the offensive line's going to have some issues there. So I would say Duvernay Tardif, but yeah, the Damian Williams one surprised me because I think he would have been, even if no matter if it was 30%, 60%, Damian Williams was going to be a productive offensive player in the best offense in the NFL. I don't think they lose a lot there, but the offensive line could face some issues.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things where you bring in a running back and you're never quite sure of what they can do, but obviously the talent level of Clyde Edwards was like, we were pretty sure that he was able to come in and if not take the role, if Damian Williams kept it, it was because Damian Williams kind of has the edge with the coaches of kind of you don't lose it unless you do something wrong, That I think was the only thing. Otherwise, I think it's pretty clear that it won't take long for the rookie to get his reps. And from that standpoint, it's more now, okay, however good people sold you to be, you're going to have to deliver at that level because now you're the guy. And it seems like he can do it, but we'll have to check. But it is interesting with that offensive line, particularly if you start losing players, they've already spent the money so everywhere else. So we're already worried about in the next couple of years if you're going to be able to pay any of those guys to stick around. And it's going to be that much bigger of an issue when you lose that person this year and you don't necessarily have the depth. You have the starters, but depth, the effort to add more offensive linemen that can work. Cam Irving out, that didn't work. They're going to have to try pretty hard to fill that role. And then if you have anybody get injured, now you're in trouble. Now you don't really have much to go on, and you definitely don't have the money to go grab those guys to try to fill that up heading into the season. So definitely the offensive line is the biggest scary part. But that doesn't change the fact that Damian Williams, that no matter how much reps he would have got, he delivered. And with running backs, the more you have, who knows when somebody will get injured. But both losses are pretty bad. Obviously, offensive line is going to be bigger for the Chiefs. I'm trying to think if there's anything else with the NFL right now. I think really, once we kind of talk, we'll do some bets later. for the NFL. But otherwise, I think it's all about MLB and NBA right now. And part of it is just kind of getting back into fandom, getting back into watching, seeing how the product is, because obviously no fans in attendance. And as a professional wrestling fan, I've had to watch a lot of shows in the last few months that did not have fans. I think it's a completely different beast with pro sports, but apparently all of the complaints that wrestling fans had, I'm hearing them all from MLB and NBA fans right now. I think mostly the MLB, particularly because it's a sport that people would already argue is a little bit boring, at least in between the action. That's kind of how baseball is built. And now when you're watching fly balls go into the stands and nobody's there, it's so bad they decided our fixes, we're going to put cutouts in there, which is the lamest thing ever. Did nobody listen to the pod when I talked about virtual fans? Did nobody listen to me? Like, they're missing such a great opportunity. But Colin, I just want to know, in the sporting events you've watched so far, how have you felt about the way they try to build the product, the changes they've made to make up for the fact that this game is going to be a lot different without the roar of the crowd?
I was so thirsty for live sports. I was like, it won't bother me that it's in an empty stadium. But I will say, watching Major League Baseball in an empty stadium, it's not as exciting as I was hoping it would be. I mean, I've still watched a few games, and I'm going to continue to watching games. But I agree with you 100%. The cardboard cutouts suck. I thought it was kind of a cool idea. I was like, oh, you'll get to see me behind home plate. You'll get to see me down the third baseline. I'm not a fan of it at all. I also didn't like when on Saturday when Fox was trying to do the virtual fans, like a video game. I didn't like that either. So
I didn't see that. So did they look like real people but virtual, or did they look like an actual like video game? Because if you play 2K, if you play any of the sports games, the fans are the worst parts about it. Like, they put no effort into that. And it's just crazy. Like, if you're trying to replicate that, bad idea from the get-go. If you're going to do something that is kind of a green screen and it is a real crowd and you're just kind of showing it in a way that is like, I don't know how you queue up at the right time, the moment is like, you remember that 1986 World Series roar at, the seventh inning? Like, that actually grabbed that crowd. Like, that might be a little too specific to figure out which things you throw on. But I think that would work a lot better. And I don't know if you go for like over realism, like you want it to look as close to the real thing as possible, or if you kind of grab those real people, but then you do kind of like the virtual, like kind of see-through, you kind of have the matrix, like ones and zeros that you can see on their face. Like, if you have a little bit like that, they look mostly realistic, but you kind of have that kind of filter on it. I don't know which one is better, but I'm okay with that idea. If that's what they did and you didn't like it, I want to see it. I'm gonna have to go find it on YouTube, because in my mind, that's what they should have done. And instead, I see these lame cutouts that they didn't even put like the arms to move. Like, they should have had just things working. Like, it should have been like Home Alone. And no, they just paste them onto the bleacher seat and pretend that's good enough.
Right. Yeah, I'm all the way out on the cardboard cutouts at every stadium. I don't care where you're playing. We don't need the cardboard cutouts. But if we did a Home Alone style where they're dancing,
have the mascots
moving
the burglars,
arms and legs. Yeah, now that we're talking. So my issue with the graphics on that Fox is doing on their baseball games, the graphics of the crowd is actually pretty well done. But the problem is it'll be 4 different camera angles. They'll cut from like showing the batter to showing the pitcher to showing the dugout to showing, and the crowd, the seats are empty in every single camera cut except for this one. And so then it goes from a crowd to no crowd. And it's just, it didn't work. Like, you go from it shows a foul ball with no crowd, and then it shows a different camera angle and there's a crowd. And it just
that's the opposite of what it is. Like, I don't need fake footage of a crowd. I need it when I see the normal scenes. I need you to put the crowd there so that when I'm looking at it, it just kind of blends. Like, I don't need extra shots for no reason, like they did the opposite of what the problem was, which also goes back to wrestling, is like the complaints from the fans are misheard. And when they rectify it, you're like, well, that's worse. And they're like, whoa, we can't win here. And it's like, well, you can't win if you're not listening, you idiots. So that's kind of the thing for me is there are, back and forth. Fans just can't decide. I know in terms of forget the fake crowd, but the fake noise. I've heard ones that loved it. They watched, the soccer league has been doing it for a while. And so you watch the Premier League, you hear it, and people have said, love it. So good, especially when you're not actually seeing the shots of the crowd, the wide shots of the field, just having that sound. Sometimes you forget there's not a crowd there. Then you've had other ones that are mad about it. They don't think it's a good idea. For me, it's probably a little bit in between. I think it really just kind of depends on the setup. To go back to pro wrestling, would have loved for them to kind of have a fake crowd. Instead, eventually they brought in a real crowd, which brings in a whole other host of issues. But they try to keep it to 20 people. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. In terms of UFC without a crowd, great. You wouldn't want to put sounds in because I would argue at times that's actually a better product than having kind of the crazy crowd making noises that aren't really in unison with the action. I mean, except when somebody goes down, that's the only time the crowd really like roars at the time something crazy happened in a UFC ring. But just hearing the corners, hearing the people talking, hearing the sounds of the punches, it's like that can work. I think the NBA, I haven't actually watched the scrimmage game, but I've heard some positive things about how they've kind of done that production value, which is you are getting that increase of hearing the players on the court, but they're also putting the time in to have that music the same way you would at a game. And then really their biggest challenge was the visuals of the crowd. And they've kind of just put these walls up. They've kind of put it, they feel like they're more on a stage than that they are, on a basketball court, which is awesome. I think playing with the format is a better idea than what baseball seems to be doing, which is let's make it as normal as possible. And then the things that are off, we'll fix them by replacing them. And I was like, that's not how it works. You're going to need to reimagine this. And I get that you're only doing it for the short term. This isn't even something you'd bring for the next season, but this goes back to the planning. Part of the planning is safety protocols. Part of the planning is the production. Like if you're going to do this, I think every fan knew. So why does the people running these professional sports organizations that are paid millions of dollars, or at the very least, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and these individuals are not putting their brains to use to figure out how to get around these things before they happen? The rest of us knew it was coming. They get here to the start of the season like, oh, we're not ready for this. Well, why not? You should have been ready and you should have came in with a better product than you're putting on. Clearly the NBA is the only one. They're ready to go. Like it's not perfect, but they were ready with, okay, let's adapt the product to make it work, knowing what our limitations are.
Yeah, I was a little surprised when the NBA kind of released their original kind of timeline of events. These are when players are going to arrive. These are when scrimmages start. These are when the 8 games start. This is when the playoffs start. And I was like, that's a long ways away. But shout out to the NBA. They were able to get everyone in the bubble, and you had very few players leave for family emergencies or whatever. And then most of the players stayed there. They were there for a couple weeks. They've been practicing. Obviously, we're getting ready to start the 8-game short little regular season. But they're obviously testing very well. They're testing negative. They're not having outbreaks. And so if they're able to maintain that, and because they're in a bubble, there's a good chance the number of cases will stay really, really low. They did it right. So they really did a good job of getting everyone there a few weeks ahead of time and then starting with the season. And I think of all the leagues, the NBA is going to be the easiest to watch with no crowd. Just because the focus is on the court so much. You're not going to have balls flying into the stands quite the same way. You don't need to have a blimp aerial footage of the arena.
Think of what happens at a basketball game. You're talking classic basketball was like an organ. The modern basketball, they're playing, just rap music or any sort of R&B loud enough that it's like, let's fill up all the silences. And, I think to whatever degree it's a performance that's great. Some people might think it's a little too loud, but it is not a part of the broadcast. It's like, there is a completely different game you watch from going in the arena to watch a NBA game versus what you hear on the broadcast. And you could probably make that argument for other sports, but I think with NFL, the roar you hear when you're at a game, they make sure that roar gets in to parts of that broadcast, I think with the NBA, you almost never hear the crowd. Like, it's so rare that that's a part of it. The music that they're playing in between is just as big what's going on, and that they can control in the bubble. If they want to do the fake noise, they can do that. And then uh, in terms of the shots, you're not like, you have courtside people that you're missing, but otherwise you don't see most of the crowd for most of the shots you're going to end up using. So that is definitely, I think MLB is probably the only one that has that problem of the crowd is such a huge part of any big moment, not just from the cheer of the crowd, but when you hit the ball and it's going into play, you see a shot of the crowd every single time, and they're not there. So that's going to just be a problem for MLB. And I think NBA, they were already in a better place for it. They also made the necessary steps to kind of enhance it, and that got me excited. You're right about the testing too. They're the most likely to get through this without a problem, not just because of the work they put in, but because of the size of the teams. And even though they're indoors, it's 5 players on a court at a time, 5-on-5. That they can handle the numbers game. Really, the only thing that can bring you down is people going to Magic City for the wings. Like, apparently, I didn't realize you could leave the bubble. So this Lou Williams story taught me something about this. I did not do enough research because I was like, wait, how did this even happen? Because nothing's better than a player getting outed by a famous rapper. That's crazy to me. But in fairness, the wings he got are named after him. So I do buy the story that he just went for the wings. I don't think anything nefarious happened. It's not any different than going to Wingstop, in my opinion.
Yeah, best wings in the city. So Lou Will was hungry, and he just thought he'd be quick. And I thought it was – I feel like he was going to get away with it if he wouldn't have been blasted on social media. But,
Think about
it is what it is.
People are so famous. I imagine that if any of this happened, like when I was thinking of like the players having the snitch line, and I didn't imagine anybody do it. I thought, there was jokes going around to be more like coaches and Chris Paul, who just is a coach and also is such a competitor. He was probably sitting there every night just peering out the window waiting like, I'm going to call. You better not go anywhere. I think it to me, it was always if they're leaving, which I didn't even think they would, necessarily be leaving, but that's going to blow up on social media, right? And I thought even, there was already kind of I think one girl on Twitter who said she was invited and then wouldn't say who. And then I think somebody guessed one of the players. I think somebody guessed Donovan Mitchell, and she said, "Oh, I wish," which has got to hurt the feelings of that player that had actually invited her. But like, it seemed like that type of scenario is the way they'd get caught if somebody was cheating the system. Little they know, it's actually the friend. Like, nobody would have known. Nobody would have known Lou Will did that, which is kind of the fear. Like, anybody that's allowed to leave, like, if it's not a true bubble, if you're not going to kick people out when they leave, in this case, it was an excused absence, and he was going to have to do a 4-day quarantine, and now it's going to, be a 10-day quarantine, 9-day quarantine, then that is still a good policy. It's a good way to catch it, but also they might not have caught it. And if he would have got coronavirus while there, brought it back and spread it, like, that could have shut this whole thing down. And, it's kind of amazing that Lou will skate by here because you would imagine all of the sacrifices these players have made, and one trip to Magic City, whether it was just for the wings or whether he stayed for a little while, it seems like people would be mad at him, but I guess he's a likable enough figure that nobody in the NBA was just like, really, man? Really? Or they all kind of thought like, yeah, I would have gone to Magic City too. Those are some great wings, man.
I feel like the one thing that helps Lou Williams is that the timing, he did it when we're getting ready to start the 8-game regular season. If he's doing this in like the Western Conference semifinals or Western Conference finals, it's probably a different story. So I think this is my chance. I'm going to get out. I'm going to get some wings. I'm going to get back to the bubble. So I think that the timing helped, but I will say players should be really careful, especially now that we're playing games. Like, the scrimmages are over. This is the real deal. We got 8 tune-up games, and then we got a best-of-7 series where their season's on the line. The one thing that helps the NBA is over the course of August and September, you're going to go from 22 teams to 16 to 8 to 4. And obviously, the fewer players there, the less will you have to test, the less likely of an outbreak. But again, the NBA somehow has 22 teams with a full roster and 0 positive cases. So that's the best sign of all as we get ready for some real basketball.
Yeah, and I would say that the 22 teams is probably the biggest mistake that the NBA has made to this point, was just forcing in teams that didn't really need to be there. And it seemed like a lot of it was to get the Pelicans in, and then Zion's not ready to go at the beginning. And then, you force teams in that, have star players like the Wizards, but Bradley Beal's out, John Wall's out, and then even Bertans is too big of a star to put himself on the line. He needs to sit out because he's about to get a big contract and doesn't want to risk it. All of a sudden, you have some teams in there that are pretty awful. And, you could argue that you just need a certain number of teams to get the scrimmage games in. And, like, it just, without them, you're not going to be able to get these guys ready to go to start the year. And so it seems like you're taking on a bigger risk to have them there, but it just kind of has to work that way. You just need more than just the teams that are ready to go. But at the same time, that was probably the only decision they really made that was kind of a bad decision. Just extra bodies in there that otherwise, if you get rid of that and you look at how successful they've been, it seems like this is completely feasible for them to go through and, not even have a major outbreak, because it seems like, as opposed to the Marlins where you have the one and then they interact enough to have the entire team, it seems like the NBA might be able to catch this pretty early on. And it's tough because you have people that are, asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic, and they could pass it before it even registers, but they're doing the tests every day. It seems a lot like they'll figure it out pretty quick. And at the very least, they're already minimizing the contact. You're obviously going to have a level of contact when you're playing the games, and even to a degree in practice. But when you've minimized it, there's the chance to catch it before it spreads to a whole team. And that makes it where, they've already made it pretty rare. Nobody's gotten it. If they're going to get it, you're talking about somebody who's an employee there that brings it in, and it's kind of this weird happenstance that if that's the biggest threat, then, then it's a one-off. And as long as it's a one-off and not an outbreak, then you're in perfect shape. So NBA has got it down. Everything else is like, wait and see. We're going to have to keep watching. We don't have to overreact when something happens, but there's just no way to know for sure whether something will work out and what will be kind of the biggest problem in these other sports. What can be the thing that leads to an outbreak? What kind of causes the problem? And then how much are just kind of in society right now with the numbers? Are they all just kind of at risk the way the Marlins are? So a lot of stuff we're going to have to pay attention to. But like I said, somehow I am more optimistic this week than I've been all summer about sports, not just because they're starting and they're blinding me. Because I tried to watch Last Chance U. I got through one episode, but I'm going to have to take it slow. Normally I binge it. First night it's up on Netflix, I knock it out. But I'm going to go a little bit slower because I just watched that first one. I didn't feel good because I still wasn't sure about football. But every day that goes by as I kind of see this go together, I'm still scared of what it'll look like, but at least I can now imagine a scenario where it works. I'm not saying that's what will happen, but at least I can like imagine the possibility. So it's got me in a much better mood to this point. I do want to start doing some bets since we're going to, be going at this. So I want to figure out, I think NBA team wins. If I can get this, my bookie to upload, we're just going to steal whatever lines they got there. It'll never load. This is going to take forever. But I think with NBA teams, 8 games for the play-in, and, I guess we'll start with a better one to go first. Is there a team that you imagine won't win a game, or a team that won't lose a game through these 8-game play-in?
No, I think it'll be close though. I think we'll have a team or two go 1-7. That really just they're already 4 games behind the 8 seed. They don't have much of a shot, and so I think we'll see a 1-7. I don't think you'll see a team lose all 8. On the flip side, I don't think you'll see a team win all 8. just they might rest an extra player here if it's right before the playoffs or something like that. But it'll be interesting to see kind of like how they handle. I don't mean like the first 5 or 6 games of the 8-game season, but more like the last 1 or 2. Once they're more solidified in their spot in the standings, how are they going to handle that? So I think that's what I'm kind of curious to see. But I don't think we'll see a team go 0 or undefeated.
Okay. I don't think it opened up the the team games. Yeah, I just went to championship odds. So if there was a team, if you could imagine one team, you don't have to think that they will happen, but one team that has the best chance of running the table, who would you go with?
I'm going to say Houston.
Okay.
I think that with a healthy roster, with Harden, and if Westbrook's recovered well, I could see them if they can shoot the ball better than anyone on certain nights. I'll just say Houston.
All right. Yeah. For me, I'd go not Houston because part of it is they shoot so many threes, and this compact schedule. So when you think of like 3-point shooters like fading in the fourth quarter, like every game's going to feel like a fourth quarter now because they're going to just be playing one game after another. And so I think early on, particularly, with kind of the way James Harden plays, I think they'll come out and they're going to be so hard to defend with that small ball. They're going to throw off teams early on. There's going to be bad matchups. But in terms of running the table, I don't think it'll work. I do think they will be hella successful with the way this is styled because teams just – it's one thing to prepare with time. It might be, against the Rockets in terms of what they've been able to do this year with that small ball lineup when they actually are in a series and a team is able to figure it out, settle for how to stop them. I'm hoping that the Rockets don't even try too hard with the play-in games because I want to see what James Harden looks like fresh going into a playoffs. I think every year we've seen a guy who has just ripped his body apart as he is just Iron Manned up 34, 35 plus points per game, is just running through and being, all of the offense for the Rockets. And not only did he have Russell Westbrook to defer to and just let him take the load for so much of the year, I think going into a playoffs where he isn't already so exhausted, so beat down, there's a chance that this is James Harden's best chance to make a deep run in the playoffs. Now, I think when he's had better teams, though, before, and this team with that small ball has done some amazing things, it's also going to be something that's much easier to predict when you're facing a better team that kind of has that deep roster. They will figure out a way to kind of scheme against them. But you're also scheming against the team that you've never seen James Harden get to do that in a playoffs. You could say it's the scheme that slowed him down in years past, but I think it's probably more that his body is just taken down because he is playing endless minutes, carrying that team, willing them to a top seed. And now he's fresh. James Harden's fresh, and it'll be fun to watch. If I was to pick a team to run the table, I guess I would just have to go with the Bucks because we just haven't seen them lose enough to think they can't do it, and they win by so much. They have this stacked team. They don't necessarily just need it to be Giannis. And then the close second is the Clippers, who I think we've yet to see what they do. I guess the one reason I wouldn't pick them is I don't think they'll go into that full mode yet. I think even with coming into this, that load management is going to matter just as much with this kind of really tight schedule, getting those 8 games in. And even though it's a short run, it's going to be a lot of pressure to go through, and they're not going to risk it. But that's a team that I just have to imagine they're going to be that much better in the playoffs. They haven't shown you what they can do as a defense yet. And it's there with Kawhi. You have to imagine it's there when Paul George is locked in, and they have the rest of the players around them. So that's a team that is going to be hella good in the playoffs. I just don't imagine they're going to turn it on yet. So that would be my pick, but I think Bucks, they're already tearing through people, and unless they just are resting Giannis so much that they lose a game, I think they have the best shot of running the table. Next,
I think we'll see Milwaukee get really hot, and I don't think anyone in the East is going to slow them down. I still don't.
I want to see the Celtics. That's the one that I think has a shot. I mean, that's the big thing is maybe the Bucks are just that good, so it won't matter. But the East is weird this year because the second best team is the Raptors, and no matter what they do, it feels like if you don't have Kawhi, that's so much just going to be the Raptors of the years past. Like maybe it's not DeMar DeRozan, but like I just don't see Kyle Lowry and company being able to do much more than be a great regular season team and then not be able to beat some of the top East teams in the playoffs. And then when you start moving down the list, it's like, all right, Celtics. And then like it's a gap before I get to the next team that I think matters. And I think it's the 76ers. And they might end up as the 6th seed facing the Celtics in round one. And with the 76ers, it's such a weird fit for these players. It's the new rap on Joel Embiid is he just doesn't care enough. He's not consistent enough, and not just from like the skill level. They know the skills there. They're questioning his grind. They're questioning how much he's going to put the time in. But that goes back to similar to the Clippers. We know that Joel Embiid delivers in the playoffs, and would it be great if he was consistently great? And that hasn't necessarily what you've seen in the playoffs. That's also a 76ers team that was one weird bounce of the ball from beating the eventual NBA champions. And it's a different team without Jimmy Butler, but a lot of those pieces are starting to figure out how to work together. There's the Shake Middleton factor where you're like, okay, as a three-point shooter, can he help Ben Simmons be in the right place at the right time and kind of cover what's wrong with Ben Simmons' game? What's wrong when you have three guys who are not elite outside shooters as your core players in Ben Simmons, Joel Embiid, and Al Horford? Maybe. We'll see. But, like, all I know is their top end is so high, I wouldn't count them out. And Celtics, that we mentioned on a previous podcast, Jason Tatum is the key. If he plays like Jason Tatum that we saw at the end of the when the season stopped, then I can't just say that they can't beat the Bucks. It's still tough because even at that level, that doesn't guarantee they'll beat the Bucks, but it'll be a fun series to watch. So I'm excited for all of those, and we're going to do other bets, except my computer is not powerful enough to load up my bookie right now. So instead of hitting up some of the specific over-unders, let me look one more time on here. This is a good one. So I asked a similar thing with the 8 games in the playoffs. Who was more likely to run the table? In terms of the NFL, what team will have the most regular season? I'll let you pick. One of us will do wins, one of us will do losses. What team will have the most wins or the most losses in the NFL this season? We're assuming the season will be played.
Yeah. Most wins. I'm going to go Seattle Seahawks.
Ooh, that's solid. I like that. They're making the moves. They're getting that defense back together, and we know what Russell Wilson can do.
I think Russell's on a mission. I really think the Seahawks are going to be special this year. That division's really good, but I like the Seahawks.
More important, does Russell Wilson get his first MVP vote? Not win the MVP, but even get one person to vote for him, which is apparently a thing. He has not received one vote in his career.
It feels like yes, just because the last 2 winners, Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes, they both have already won their MVP. And I think they're both good enough to win multiple. But because those quarterbacks have recently won, I think we go with the veteran Russell. I think he gets a vote. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would have used that argument every year for Russell Wilson getting one single MVP vote, but we'll see. What was I going to go with? So I got to go losses. This is a tough one. I mean, I want to say the Buccaneers, but Dolphins, I have to imagine, are going to be better this year just from the fact that they played above what they were supposed to do. Brian Flores looks like a great coach, even if that roster was beat down in his first season there. Let's just say Chargers. They are the sleeper pick to win the AFC West, which I think is freaking nuts. Like, I don't need people to defend Phillip Rivers, but if you think Phillip Rivers is like the only reason that Chargers team couldn't put it together, like, that's not what was happening. Most of Phillip Rivers' interceptions are because the team isn't winning and he is willing to take the risk. When you go back and you look at kind of down and distance when those interceptions happen, like, you can argue, okay, you gave the ball away and that gave the game away. Most of the time, they were going to give the game away on a punt. Like, I can never get mad at that. Now, that doesn't mean the interceptions are all a mirage. His numbers have not been great for a few years now, but I don't imagine just throwing in a rookie is going to magically make them, take the division away from the reigning Super Bowl champs. And I think while there is so much talent there, I'm not denying that. I feel like that's the type of team when you have the pressure of, we think you're good enough to win a division, but really you've taken a huge step back because you've lost your signal caller of the last, 15 years. I think that's a huge potential for a drop off, particularly where so much of what they had was on that defensive side. And we know defense year to year, particularly in a year where you're not going to get a practice, you're going to have the same type of training camp. That can be what falls off. That's the most likely variance, is on a defense that was good one year and is bad the next. So I'm going Chargers just to be cheeky. I think next up, I want to do best bet for non-playoff teams. So who did not make the playoffs this year that you'd be willing, it doesn't have to be a lot of money, but you'd put $10 down for their money line to say, hey, I think this team is good enough to not only make the playoffs, but make a run at it.
It's stupid, but I'm going to say it anyway. Arizona Cardinals. I like Cliff Kingsbury. I think Kyler Murray is going to get better. And they picked up DeAndre Hopkins, so they have one of the best receivers in the league. So they still don't have it on defense. They have some missing pieces. And like I mentioned, they're in a really tough division. But I want to see what Kyler Murray does in year 2. So I'll say Arizona.
That's good. I like that. I think that could really work out. I'm still trying to load up ESPN to look over the teams as a potential picks here. This is a hard one for me because this is the worst year to pick somebody, and you stole the only team that I could see the upside. It feels like this is a chalk year. It's like the NFL is something that can be so vastly different from year to year. Such a big turnover rate of playoff teams that just can't make it back because it's so hard to field a team, to stay healthy, to get it done. And even if you have the quarterback in place, which has become the only position that really can help you figure out which teams are going to be good and bad, I feel like this is the one year right now where maybe the advantage is just keeping things the same. So it's hard to imagine which team made a big enough change to be better than they were last year and isn't going to be left with a team that doesn't have the chemistry, because you're not going to get those reps in together in training camp and lead up to the season. It's tough for me. And I still, God, this computer will not load.
Hey, don't sleep on Slim Ben.
Yeah, I'm not going the Steelers just because I feel like they always seem to be, even when they're like just winning, it's like one bad break, one injury, they're not a playoff team. And it's really tough for me to pick. I could be crazy and I could go like the Browns, but I mean, that's just to be funny. The Buccaneers didn't make the playoffs, right?
Correct.
So the safe money pick is the Buccaneers, although I guess their money line's probably not that great. So it's tough to pick. I guess even more important than which team didn't make the playoffs that can get the win, we got to look at the Patriots. Do we think that division is going to still be held by the Patriots sans Tom Brady, or is there somebody else who's going to steal that spot and maybe make a run this year?
So I think it'll be interesting to watch what Belichick does with coaching a Patriots team for the first time without a Tom Brady at quarterback. I guess except for the year Matt Castle was there when Brady was hurt. But I want to see what the Patriots do like the first 3 or 4 games. Because if they start, let's say 3-1, 2-2, if they're winning off the bat, I think that obviously they have a quarterback in Cam Newton that's good enough to lead them to an AFC East title. But if they get off to a slow start, let's say they start 1-3, they have a couple, tough losses. I want to see what Belichick does, because if they're able to sneak in like a 5-11 or 4-12 season, trade up to the number 1 pick, draft Trevor Lawrence as the future quarterback, maybe Belichick wants to coach 5 more years and see what he can do with a Trevor Lawrence. But that's obviously a long ways away. But if they get off to a slow start, I could see them trying to strategically not go to the playoffs and maybe have a top 5 or 7 pick to trade up and take number 1 overall.
Who wins more games, Buccaneers or Patriots?
Tampa Bay.
Got a lot of faith in Tom.
I do. And those receivers.
I guess that's fair. The receiving core is ridiculously good. At the same time, you're talking a 40-plus-year-old quarterback who is switching teams, is trying to work with these receivers when I assume Tom Brady is just going to install his system, which is the most complicated system in the NFL. It seems a lot like that is doomed for failure in a year where you can't really practice with your teammates, although I guess Tom Brady circumvented that and skipped the line a little bit. So maybe he's just so set on being the best that he's going to make it work. I'm going to go Patriots. Let's do my favorite bet from the NFL show. We do fillet of fishes, and that's how you say it. I know it's supposed to be fillets of fish, but no, it's from McDonald's. McDonald's grammar is fishes. So I'm going to put down 2 fillet of fishes that Patriots have more wins than the Buccaneers this season.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I would agree with you if Brady wasn't the greatest of all time. I really think I think with Bruce Arians, he'll get along well enough with Brady. He'll have a system in place, even going up against Drew Brees in a division that's pretty competitive. I think that Tampa Bay wins more than 11 games, and they go to the playoffs. I don't know if they win that division. They'll be close, but they're obviously a playoff team, and I don't know. I'm not going to count out Brady. I don't care if he's 43.
I need you to put your fillet of fishes where your mouth is. You going to take the bet?
Yeah, I'm on it.
Yes.
2 fillet of fishes.
First fillet of fish bet on the Too Many Points podcast. This is great. That's a great way to finish it. Colin, thank you for coming on. We will definitely be talking some more. For anybody who likes movies, we're going to end up having a Q Crew episode in the near future that you will be on. And we'll definitely be back to talk about sports because we've already talked so much with no sports. So it's going to be exciting to have that back and to get to have those conversations. So thank you for coming on, and we will have you back soon.
Let's do it.
That's all we have for this edition of Too Many Points on the Tell Me More podcast. Later, folks.